The sin was begun in eternity and will not rest to eternity, till two eternities meet together. Ah, lost, lost forever. What in the world does the meteor which killed the dinosaurs, the fall of man, and the evolutionary pressure which made vision our dominant sense have in common? Well, this thing apparently. Let me see if you heard this one. Chrono Cross failed as a sequel to Chrono Trigger, but it is a good game in its own right. Well, my experience with Cross has been the opposite, to be honest, and hopefully you'll understand why by the end. I'm told that people see Chrono Trigger as a beautifully simple game, but with a design superstructure so tight that it has by now already been examined to the marrow. But I come to put that apparent simplicity into question. Although Chrono Trigger can reveal itself as simple, there are whirling complexities below its surface. This comes to light precisely when put next to Chrono Cross. It has been said that Cross is everything that Trigger isn't. Trigger is simple, Cross is complex. Trigger is free will, Cross is determinism. Trigger is consistent, Cross is convoluted. Trigger gets its point across, Chrono Cross meanders. Trigger is more than the sum of its parts. Cross's parts are in an entangled mess. I agree with most of these assessments. It's precisely by posing as its antithesis that Cross reveals its deeper meaning, as well as highlighting those that were already in Trigger in the first place. It's like carving the negative space being precisely what completes the whole picture. I'm here to show you this complementary nature, and what the Chrono series philosophy points towards. Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, FF7, Parasite Eve, Xenogears, and Chrono Cross have a well of similar ideas leaking into one another. And we can infer much from those similarities and how they end up converging and diverging depending on the work. Trigger and Cross are two parts of the same thing, and for the longest time, the backlash against the latter has clouded the point of the series. And I think it's time to peer through the smoke. So let's start with a conclusion, a shock to the system. The Chrono series is, and it sorta always have been, about how the fall of man from Eden, as Satan from heaven, and the meteor which fell to extinguish the dinosaurs, are one in the same thing. The world is God, and God is time. Chrono Trigger borrows heavily from Christianity, which is widely understood, but to add to the interesting dualities, we'll see that Chrono Cross borrows somewhat from Zoroastrianism. Chrono Cross is a very thematic game. You ought to seek its contrasts. Look at how blue the whole game's world is, and how red the frozen flame is. The blue-haired Surge, though a user of the white element, the blonde kid, a user of the red element. Already here there is a connection between a character and the frozen flame. The player in Chrono Trigger is having Chrono as their proxy, a character representing their own will, who sees through the game's plot, even though its conflicts are completely outside his own era. Chrono could very easily not have done anything and he would not have suffered, but because his will and the player are one, you go and see through the game's events through a combined will with the main character, the proxy character. It's a want to muster through and change the timeline in the same motivation the player yearns to see the unfolding events of the game. Chrono chooses. Surge is chosen for. Surge is a child of fate. Split between alternate timelines, against his own will, he no longer is the owner of his own life, his own choices. One of the first major plot points the player encounters in Chrono Cross is Surge's own death, at the age of 9. Long gone for the people he supposedly knows once he has crossed dimensions. Look, there is a lot of semantic confusion within the Chrono community, and compendium, with the usage of the word dimensions. It is not an added element to the series. It is still within the themes of time. It's another duality. Trigger explores time linearly, Cross laterally. It's much like in Flatland. For the sake of abstraction, imagine time-space as a single construct. You probably heard time is the fourth dimension before, and perhaps got confused. Imagine then a sphere crossing a 2D plane, and that 2D plane is filled with 2D beings to observe it. The sphere would have each plane of its own cut into many circles, which to the 2D beings appear as a flat object growing in and out of existence, as it enters and exits the 2D plane. They do not experience the full dimensionality of the 3D sphere through space, but only as sections throughout time. To them, the next dimension to their own is time. That would be the case to us as well. It isn't that time is the fourth dimension specifically, but that it is our current dimensions plus one. In regular meat space, things do not act the same as abstract mathematical spaces, so do not use this logic as a measure for reality. But for the sake of the game's logic, as well as many other sci-fi narratives, it is easy to postulate a fourth W axis, in addition to the original X, Y, and Z. That's what you are doing in Chrono Cross, every time you jump through dimensions. You are going to different coordinates of the W axis. Our inability to experience the totality of the next higher dimension allows us only to experience its hyper-objects as sections, like the 2D beings with the sphere, using time. Only one axis added. So we may clear up confusions about the keystone dimension, considered to be the main dimension of the story, because there is no true distinction between timelines and alternate dimensions. They are one and the same, and in the events of the game, we discover the means and knowledge on how to cross the paths of the W-axis, exploring time laterally, as opposed to linearly. See? Misconceptions with Chrono Cross begin quite early. The problem has never been that the game has nothing to say, but just that, due to its flawed design, it has trouble saying it. So what is the point of Chrono Cross, and hence the series overall? Well, fate on one hand, being a puppet and able to cut the strings, but in order to see those strings, we must go into heavy spoiler territory from the get-go. You could say it is all leading up to a single moment where the truth is eventually revealed. We can understand Surge, and hence the player is not in control of anything going on in the plot. A far cry from Trigger. But this was marked with a purpose. Chrono Cross puts Surge in the middle of a game between higher and higher entities, trying to outplay each other, each mirroring from above, having a worldly representative. Fate has Lynx, the dragons have Harley, Shala has Kid, and Lavos has the Frozen Flame. The story instrumentalizes Surge to be but a tool for these parties to get their way into their own plots and one-up each other. Surge was nothing but a biological matrix for Fate to use as mere code. Nothing but someone to get someone else into a facility otherwise impossible, and someone for Harley to tag along and play her role. This determinism is visceral, but by merging the dragon tiers from each opposing timeline, the player creates a possibility for compatibility, a way to cross from one timeline to another and merging them, a Chrono Cross. But what does this all mean? Well, in Chrono Trigger, Lavos falls into the planet and exterminates the reptiles. The analogy is simple. We are to make a parallel between this and the meteor which killed the dinosaurs. Should the player finish the game before seeing this event, we see an ending where humanity is not the dominant species, but instead are the reptiles. The heavens have sided with the apes. But why? This ending was originally seen as sort of a gag ending, but Chrono Cross takes it very seriously. Indeed, should humanity not have inherited the world thanks to Lavos, the reptiles would continue evolving. And as we see with Dinopolis, they would have a far more compatible and organic civilizational progress. Reptiles have to be a reference to Troodons, a dinosaur species said to have the chance to develop intelligence should they not went extinct. In Cross, they evolve into dragons in their own timeline. This is possible because Chrono Cross accepts each ending in Trigger as canon in their own way, all as parallel timelines. But thanks to a time crash, which happens due to the meddling with time that Chronopolis does, now they have merged in a vortex and have to compete for their own existence. This is what we see amalgamated in the Dead Sea, bits and pieces of alternative futures. This is what Chronopolis was studying. But you won't see me delving deep into the mechanics of it all. You have Chrono Compendium for that. I'm far more interested in the broad strokes. And one of the most prevalent of those strokes is the notion of dreams. present in both Trigger and Cross. The Kingdom of Zeal and the Temporal Vortex, for example. The free energy principle tells us we need to know a bit of unreality in order to understand what actual reality looks like. Something to tell our brain apart the waking world from the dreaming. Consistency being one of the core tenets of the universe, we end up with age being able to tell easily when we're dreaming the more we learn how the world works. But it is two dreams at the same time which shape the world, being able to imagine a reality different from the one we currently find ourselves in. And someone from Zeal dreams radically, outside of time and space. That would be Shala, for which the series invisibly roams around. Fused with Lavos, they became the Time Devourer at the Darkness Beyond Time. Above all other parties guiding the plots of the game, these two have a dilemma to which both seek an answer to. We have to understand, thus, that Lavos is the glue to the superstructure of Chrono Trigger's design. Trigger is praised for its gestalt, how the gameplay communicates so elegantly with the story, and the story with the music, and the music once again with the gameplay, and so on. As a whole, more than the sum of its parts. All this is thanks to Lavos, their North Star for the designers at any given point. Nothing happens without its influence. Lavos is an unstoppable, omnipresent force behind everything in the game. Each boss you fight will become a part of Lavos. Each plot point, no matter how deviating and personal, happens only due to Lavos' influence. Civilization existing is but a harvest for Lavos to reap. And the unliving machines to take over once humanity's domain is gone, so Lavos' offspring can begin the cycle anew in other planets. It seems like a force of nature, but a parasitic, cosmic, foreign one. Humans are stepchildren of Lavos. Humanity originated from nature, but coming into contact with Lavos changed humans fundamentally, like being able to use magic instead of elements. Lavos' destructive tendencies thus carried over to humans and our progress. After playing through Cross, it made some aspects of Trigger stand out, like the Ice Age. I interpret that as the planet trying to cause the extinction of humanity, and that Lavos arose not solely because of the Mammon machine, but because it interfered to keep humanity alive, because they had not fulfilled their purpose yet. Notice how the weather becomes milder after Lavos arises. What the player ends up doing in Chrono Trigger is tying the planet's loose ends. Empowering yourself by empowering the world. Its minerals become weapons for you to use against Lavos. You gain access to them by carefully changing things throughout time to make the world a better place to live, and by fulfilling your character's stories. It has long been debated what the entity was when the party mentions it in the campfire scene. Masato Kato has confirmed that the entity is the planet. And of course it is. Not only is it coherent with the themes of the game, but if you look at what Square was producing at around this time, you'd obviously notice a specific echo philosophy going on. There was a creative symbiosis going on in 90s Squaresoft. Secret of Mana shares a lot of this nature sentiment, for example. Chrono Trigger was meant to be Final Fantasy VII, which was meant to be Xenogears, which shares a lot of the elements with Chrono Cross or Parasite Eve. These began with the development of Final Fantasy VI, where every team member could propose the creation of a main character. But it grew in intricacy and scope as team members began to have the dreams and the resources for other projects. So we see parallels. Lavos from Chrono Trigger, Genova from FF7, Eve from Parasite Eve, and Deus from Xenogears are all sides of the same die. Lavos is the beast, the Antichrist, what Nostradamus predicted would emerge in the year 1999. Deus is the Demiurge, the god of the fake material world preventing humanity from spiritual emancipation. Both types of evil are a video game coding over existing archetypes. This means the Chrono series is ripe to be interpreted on such ends. I don't think I need to say anything about Christianity, since that's been long debated and explored. However, there is one thing Shala says near the end of Chrono Cross which changes everything and proves another, even older influence over the story. She mentions the Sea of Zurvan. Lavos and Shala are opposite sides of the same coin. It all goes back to Spenda and Angra Mainyu of Zoroastrianism, the prototype for monotheism, the first known division between the concepts of good and evil. Zurvanism is an offshoot from Zoroastrianism, and in there, both Ormuzd, good, and Hariman, evil, have a father entity of which was divided into them, Zurvan. Zurvan is time itself, and it fathers both good and evil. Now I want you to imagine a humanity living before such concepts were encoded into words. Sounds impossible, right? How many awful things needed to happen, or have we done to each other, until someone ended up saying, that is bad? These reverberated into Christianity, the fruit of knowledge, and hence the fall of man for learning the division between these things. The frozen flame is a play on the eternal flame from Zoroastrianism. The flame in that religion burns eternally, but Lavos must conserve his as frozen. Lavos is all that is parasitical in mankind. Here he is Ahriman or Angremanyu. His falling to earth was hours outside Eden, and considering the parallel with the meteor which killed the dinosaurs, under the right wording, these can be drawn, perhaps, as following. Could the homeostasis of the world be so specific, so tightly bound, that the introduction of a massive foreign body forever disrupt the organic growth of the species therein? Could the imbalances between mankind's progress and nature have been premeditated ever since then, before our very existence? Could we then be the indirect offspring of an alien product, thus foreigners to the supposed natural state of things of the world we find ourselves in? Chrono Trigger asks this question, indirectly, in the background. Chrono Cross proved the possibility of an answer. What is the Chrono Cross, as in the in-game object? It plays a sound in battle for every time an element is used, corresponding to its color. We've seen a part of this before in Chrono Trigger, when in Zeal we are told of a sequence of elements to use in order to open a specific door. But here, we are to play the whole melody. It is a strange thing. Chrono Cross's final boss takes place in utter silence, in utter blackness, no background whatsoever. This is the only case I've found of such a thing in a lifetime of playing RPGs. This is because it is setting the stage for the Chrono Cross elements to be played. The sequence is harmony, Lavos is dissonance. The player has to play a specific sequence of elements, but the Time Devourer will always disrupt it during their turn. This makes it so the player has to anticipate and use the dissonance as part of the melody, to make Lavos' elements our own up to it. When the sequence is finally put together, then it plays. The melody called Life. Shala is liberated. This was the Time Devourer dilemma. Shala believed humanity could coexist with the planet's will, where Lavos, the godfather of humanity, did not. Lavos taught humanity to be as disruptive as he is, and if all we do is regularly defeat the final boss, that's precisely what we prove. The ending credit scene is in black and white, with the only colors being red and blue, symbolizing this dilemma. Should we liberate Shala, we get a scene of her finally as a whole being liberated. The live action scene symbolizes the capacity to interweave this messaging within our own lives. Pay attention to Shala's last dialogue. Consider what Kid is, and contrast it with the frozen flame. Kid, whilst part of Shala, part of someone else's will, ended up developing her own personality, her own self. The frozen flame stayed put as but a shard of lavos. At this moment we see the strings, and our possibility to cut them. The life melody was composed in a way to remind us of Shalocene. And we know how important music is to the Chrono series. Matter is but music staying still. As far back as Pythagoras this phrase goes. Music existed before our memory of music. Serge is then transported to the same shore, forgetting the whole of the journey. But no longer will he have his actions dictated by entities of fate. Chrono Trigger gave us free will. Chrono Cross has shown us determinism, and at its very end, we achieve compatibilism. Even if all things are determined, we can never act as if it was the case. Perhaps this is our incompleteness, but it must become the case within our own will. There is yet another parallel to the fall. The Chrono Cross transports us to a space before the symbolic visual space we currently inhabit. The space before encoding things into symbols, before measuring, aka before time itself. It takes us back to an acoustic space, one where things were known omnidirectionally through the ear, not narrowly through the eye, precisely before the cogs of fate began to turn. The space to where animals and nature still exist in, for they haven't fallen into time. This to be used not as a crux, but as a reminder of the place we fell from, and what that means to us in our current shape. It fractures us, only to put us back together. The imagery of the shore reminds me of very real shores I look out for every summer. The puddles in the rocky structures that the rising tides leave behind create pockets of timelessness. The fish and anemone located in those puddles suddenly are in an enclosed universe. But without memory of a symbolic space, for them it has always been as if it were the case. Yet the rising tides come again and take them back to the sea. It is much like interacting with a deep piece of art. For a while you lie in a different notion of time, dilated according to your own experience of such. But eventually it ends, and you come back to the time-space of your regular day-to-day life. Everything that needs progress requires fracturing. Even for something like a muscle to grow, first needs them to be ruptured. Learning anything new means to do away with an older vision of the world, to make space for new information which will at some point change the structure of our very own thought. Unlike the fish who jumps from one eternity to another, for us, symbolic and measuring beings, time is always shattering us. We are divine waist up, but beast waist down. We always live in a dilemma of duality. For this to be better understood in the themes of the game, I need to call forth another game we mentioned before. Xenogears. And yes, spoilers. You see, both in Chrono Cross and Xenogears, there is an exactly similar room. One where a dystopian civilization fabricates what the player uses as save points, telling it as a means of gathering data from the citizens for so-and-so ends. But this is merely one in many similarities between the titles. To resume Xenogears to any short length is a tall order, to say the least. So I'll say this. Xenogears is about fracturing. Fracturing of history, of land, of psyche. It is about shattered things to be put together again. It has many Western influences from philosophy to psychology to religion. Namely, it has a strong commentary on Gnosticism, a critique even. Xenogears is the story of an unexplored world becoming inhabited by a new humanity born from the fractured texts of our history and mythology, brought to existence thanks to essentially a genie engine named Zohar. This aspect of creation makes humanity incomplete, so certain religions of the world came up with a useful metaphor. God made angels with one wing only, so they have to hold hands to fly. The characters of this game essentially are in the process of learning its meaning. There is this character Krelian, who is not content with the world of matter and seeks to become one with God, and ends up being the final villain. Faye, the main character, on the other hand, has met this god entrapped within the Zohar. Faye and his love Ellie capture perfectly the one-winged angel Reverick, as God intended. They had many incarnations throughout time that served as complementary to one another. Krelian at the very end of the game, grows 2 wings. In most stories, this would have meant an enlargement of freedom, but here it is one of loneliness. He can only fly alone. He may go outside the world of matter, but he gave up his humanity by growing past what God intended. He spent his whole life attempting to be something else, never allowing fracturing. The fracturing psyche of Faye, on the other hand, ends up uniting his many sides into an actual stronger whole. Things are made more beautiful for having once been broken, tells us the Japanese art of kitsungi, which unites fragments of a broken object with a golden gluing agent, an Eastern response to a vortex of Western ideologies within the game. Like I previously mentioned, 90 Squaresoft has a creative symbiosis going on, and so much of what I can say about Xenogears, given the admission of a larger corpus, then so can I say about Chrono Cross. Both games, as in their design, are broken. Xenogears didn't have enough development time and had to cut the second half by a lot. Chrono Cross's constituents are astray from what the meaning of the game is actually trying to say. Both are struggling to get their message across. And this reflects on the stories themselves. At the very end of Cross, you put Surge back together after him being torn by so many entities playing the game of fate. The gluing agent was the Chrono Cross itself and the Song of Life. And I can say that when I first played the game, something similarly happened to me. I gained a new outlook. It changed my perspective of Chrono Trigger, my favorite game, and it struck something in my own philosophy as well. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. Masato Kato went to tears when he first looked at the scene of Shala being liberated with Yasunori Mitsuda's music. That is not the sign of meaningless complexity, as many have claimed before. I am here essentially writing thousands of words to explain something I felt in a minute during the same scene, drawing an exegesis of whatever meaning I can convey to someone else. Time is our most important resource. It is an element we are always considering. No wonder so many great media have time as their main focus. Zurvan's shadow is still cast upon us. We must remember it. Though there are many games which explore time in a creative and meaningful ways, like Radiant Historia and Outer Wilds being some of my favorites, there is a medium which flattens time and space together into the same thing. Comics, BD, manga, graphic novels, whatever you want to call them. In them, time equals space. In the very composition of them has the offer to consider how one translates to another. The year I write this marks the 30th birthday of Chrono Trigger, as well as my own, and the 50th of a mostly unknown comic which puts time as its central theme as well, Eternus 9, created by my master, mentor and friend Victor Mesquita. One look at the page's layout already gives the impression on how time and space are melding together to form a gestalt where the narrative can exist in. This interplay between form and content is to me akin to the superstructure of Chrono Trigger's design, where every part is communicating with every other part. And what's curious is that both of them have the same type of sequel stigma. It took almost 30 years for the second Eternus 9 to come out, and the time between them became narrative time considered within the story itself. The second Eternus 9 tore apart the first as an object of nostalgia and used it to create a new meta-narrative possible only by being one layer above the previous story, deconstructing it. Is this not similar to how Chrono Cross was received? It too seems almost angry at its predecessor at first, but in a second gaze, its deconstruction pays not only a homage, but completes what came before. Yet, first impressions stay, and for too long they have tainted Chrono Cross. So I am here imploring you that, in today's age of an endless grey goo of AI-generated content, you take a closer, perhaps more hermeneutic look at poignant media from the past, where intent was clearly sewed into still. Was Chrono Trigger just entertainment to you, or was it also art? If you think the latter, then give Chrono Cross, not the game, but the story, a second chance. For me, to remember the shadow that Zurvan casts is of utmost importance. Our relationship with time is continuously ruptured. We accelerate beyond our means. Everything runs past us. Signal becomes noise. Marshall McLuhan once said that if there is a lesson to be learned in the 21st century, it is that man is not meant to live at the speed of light. I'm inclined to agree. We ought to move at the speed of mind. Only so can we attain the meaning existence in things. In the rush of acceleration, I would have never understood Chrono Cross. I had to allow eternity in an hour. I allowed for qualitative time to take over the quantitative. Today we live as if we don't need to qualify most things at all. The image and the number dictate everything, as if we were in the threshold of civilizational growth and we became beyond good and evil. I wish to have the qualitative thinking of yesteryear remembered and brought back for as much as it is allowed, for to me it feels we are currently below good and evil, due to forgetting to acknowledge why such things were encoded in the first place. We are on Lavos' side of the argument. To those wary, remember Zurvan and his sons. Remember the influence of such things. Take your time into your own hands. Stop speeding up. Stop filling every crevice. Decelerate and acknowledge that living fast isn't living well. Take into account not just the quantity, but the meaning of time. As if there was a sort of chronosticism ideology to be embraced, made up of all of these things to acknowledge. I think in the age of AI, older media is going to have a resurgence, with a bunch of second looks and reinterpretations. This was the case for me and Chrono Cross. I know if there was to exist a Chrono Break, I would not like it to become Chrono Trigger 2, but to be its own thing, like Cross was. Imagine the story of Janus and Shala meeting back together. Perhaps we defeat Lavos in body and soul, but not Lavos the idea, and certain cults aspire to become like him. Regardless, any fan speculation would never be enough. Because we can only take into account already known elements, never new ones. Chrono Trigger was not my favorite game until I played Chrono Trigger. Regardless of what it made me feel, I have no power over it, nor do I wish to. I stand back and let the work speak for itself, and only then will I attempt to create a meaning of my own. The Dream Team would never gather again, and to choose merely one ending of Chrono Trigger to be canon, then it would be betraying the game's ethos. I hope at the end of the day you still managed to enjoy this essay. I hope I managed to make you think differently about Chrono Cross and the series as a whole. So now, thank you for your time, and go take care of yours.